Chapter 1: The Weight of Bone. Chapter 1: The Weight of Bone. The mother city keeps her men underground not out of mercy, but out of housekeeping. Above, the streets breathe incense and banners. Below, the air tastes of copper, lye, and the old, patient sweetness of marrow. The first thing you learn, once you're assigned to the registry under the Basilica of Wombs, is that the city has 2 spines, one of stone for the matrons to walk, and one of bone for the rest of us to be stored. My shift begins when the bells in the upper nave complete their 3rd cycle, 3 tolls for conception, 9 for obedience, 13 for the matriarchal's voice. The sound reaches us warped, as if it's traveling through a throat full of teeth. I fasten my throat tag ivory plaque stamped with my designation, blood type, and harvest clearance and step into the descent stairwell. The walls are not carved, they are grown. The mother city's architecture isn't built so much as curated a rib arches spanning corridors, vertebrae stacked into columns, femurs mortared like pale bricks. Every surface bears the faint, oily sheen of preservation salts. It's beautiful in the way a reliquary is beautiful in artistry that insists you admire it while reminding you what paid for it. I pass a mural made of inlaid teeth. It depicts the first mothers receiving fire from something that isn't quite human in elongated silhouette with too many joints, crowned in a starless halo. The clerics call it allegory when outsiders ask, and revelation when nobody is listening. By the time I reach the registry vaults, my mouth is dry and my humor has turned to ash, which is how the city prefers its men, quiet, dehydrated, and already halfway to being a resource. Archivist Vino is waiting at the intake desk, robed in gray membranes that whisper when he moves. He is a man like me, one of the permitted kinds, trained to count and record and never interpret. His eyes flick up at my throw tag, then back to the slate in his hands. "You're late by 2 bells," he says. "I'm early by next week," I reply, "because if I don't make jokes, they'll start making me." Vino's mouth twitches in a way that might be sympathy on someone else. New consignments came in overnight. Broodmistress Karis is enthusiastic. Enthusiasm, I say, taking the slate, the virtue most praised in butchery. He doesn't answer. None of us do, when Karis is in the air like a scent. The registry vaults are a maze of cold rooms and catalogue bays, each lined with bone shelves cradling canisters. They look like organs in jars, and sometimes they are. The genetic stores are kept in glass and ceramic, sealed with wax and pressed by the matronate sigil, a circle enclosing a split seed. Men's names aren't used down here. We are indexed. We are quantities. My daily duty is simple enough to explain, difficult enough to survive. I catalog genetic material, cross-check it against the matronate's breeding quotas, and prepare allotments for the upper laboratories where the mother's lineages are spliced and blessed. The work requires precision. Precision is the mother city's gentlest cruelty. She demands you participate in your own erasure with tidy handwriting. In Bay 7, the new consignments wait in a row like obedient soldiers, of canisters packed in ice salt, each with a strip of skin parchment wrapped around its neck. The parchment is marked with the donor's designation and the date of extraction. I touch the first label with 2 fingers, as if it might burn. Designation Il 322, not me. A different Ilya. Or rather a different IL. We are not unique. We are a format. I open my ledger, ink my pen, and begin the ritual of numbers. Volume, viability, purity, source chamber, intended matron line. Each entry is a small funeral I conduct for strangers I will never meet. Men who may still be alive in their holding cells, men who may be dead already, their bodies rendered into nutrients for the mother's gardens. The city is efficient. The city is never sentimental. From deeper in the vaults comes the low thrum of the elder engines, the things that keep the cold stable, that keep the seals unbroken, that keep the mother city's appetite from spoiling. The priests call them choir hearts. I have seen one once, behind a barred maintenance grate, a mass of black metal and pale tissue pulsing like a trapped digit. He says at one point, tapping the ledger with a nail too clean for this place. Then the digit should learn to stand still, I answer, and rewrite it. There are rules in the registry that no one writes down because writing them makes them vulnerable. One of them is that you don't talk about what the genetic stores are for beyond the approved liturgy. Another is that you don't ask where the new consignments come from when the quarters spike. A third is that you never, ever falsify the ledger. I have broken that third rule only in my head, so far. By mid-shift, my fingers are cramped and my eyes are full of columns. My mind wanders, which is dangerous. Wandering minds become heretical minds, and heresy is the one disease the mother city treats aggressively. I think of the surface, the banners, the processions, the matrons in their bone-inlaid armor. I think of the matriarchal Lysandra, whose voice is said to carry the same frequency as the elder engines, harmonize in obedience into the air. I have never spoken to her directly. Men like me do not speak unless commanded. We listen, we record, we obey. Which is why, when the intake bell rings a sharper, higher note than the work bells, I look up so fast my neck cracks. Vino stiffens. Oracle summons. He whispers, as if the vault itself might overhear and report him for familiarity. A runner appears at the end of the corridor, a ritual cleric in white, face veiled, hands stained with something dark. Behind her, 2 soldiers in blackened plate hadras and forcers stand like punctuation marks. The matriarchal calls the registry to witness. The cleric says. Her voice is flat in the way of someone trained to be a mouthpiece rather than a person. Bring the ledger of Bay 7. Vino's eyes flick to mine. In them, I read a warning: don't improvise. I pick up the ledger. My palms sweat onto the leather, and I hate myself for it. Fear's another efficiency. It keeps you from thinking you deserve better. We ascend not all the way to the sunlit plazas, but to the mid-level nave, where the mother city stages her ceremonies for those necessary to the machinery but unworthy of the sky. The nave is a cathedral built from colossal scapulae and fused pelvis arches, this ceiling a lattice of ribs that curve overhead like the inside of some titanic beast. Marrow lamps hanging in clusters, their light warm and sickly, turning skin into parchment. The air is thick with incense and sterolin. The matriarchal stands at the far end, elevated on a dais of polished bone. Lysandra is older than most public images admit, but age sits on her like a crown rather than a burden. Her hair is bound in coils, threaded with small relics phalanges, I think, carved into beads. Her robes shimmer with stitched sigils that make my eyes slide away when I try to focus. Commander Hadra stands at her right, armored in matte black, helmet tucked beneath one arm. Hadra's presence is not liturgical like Lysandra's. It is practical, like a blade left on a table. Her gaze moves over me with the calm interest of someone checking inventory. Lysandra raises one hand. The clerics fall silent. Even the engines seem to hush, as if the city itself leans in to hear her. Children, a function, Lysandra says, and the words are velvet wrapped around a hook. You keep the seat count. You ensure the mother city's future remains unbroken. Vino bows deeply. I follow, a fraction behind, my humor shriveling in my throat. Lysandra's eyes settle on the ledger. Bay 7 received consignments. Yes, matriarchal Vino says. 32 canisters. Viability high. And the origin. Vino hesitates just a breath, a fatal luxury. Hadra's head tilts slightly. The soldiers behind the cleric shift their weight. Metal whispers against metal. Origin chamber marked the lower ward holding Vino answers, choosing the safest phrasing, as sealed by broodmistress Caris. Lysandra nods as if discussing weather. The lower ward produces unrest. Unrest is corrected. Corrected bodies produce corrected futures. Her gaze drifts to me, registry hand. Your designation? My throat tightens against the tag. Il 219 matriarchal. Il 219. She repeats it with an intimacy that makes my skin crawl. You write clean. I write what is required. A pause. In that pause I feel, absurdly, the shape of my own thoughts as something dangerous under my skull. I imagine them visible, like smoke, curling up toward her and betraying me. Lysandra smiles, small, contained. "What is required," she echoes, a sacred phrase for those who cannot yet comprehend purpose. Hadra steps forward half a pace, the movement crisp. "Oracle, there have been discrepancies." The word cracks through the air. Discrepancy, a polite term for theft, for sabotage, for the kind of error that becomes a public execution with hymns. Lysandra's expression doesn't change. "In a registry?" Hadra's gaze pins Vino, then flicks to me as if weighing how easily I might break. 2 canisters from last cycle were logged in transit and never arrived at the upper labs. Vino's face goes bloodless. My own heart begins a slow, punishing beat. Not because I didn't, but because the idea that someone could has entered the room like a contaminant. The possibility is intoxicating and terrifying. Lysandra's fingers trace a symbol on the bone rail of the dais. "Lost sin," she says softly. "Sin spreads." Hadra's voice is blunt. "I will seal the vaults. Question personnel. Tighten escort rotations." Lysandra's eyes return to me. "And you will continue to write what is required," she murmurs, as if granting me a blessing, "because the mother city cannot tolerate fiction." "Yes," I say, and the word tastes like rust. The ceremony ends not with dismissal but with a chant clerics intoning the litany of continuance while a procession of acolytes carries sealed canisters up the side aisle, cradled like infants. Watching them, I feel something in me twist. I don't know if it's grief or rage or simply nausea from the incense. Back in the vaults, the air feels colder, though the temperature hasn't changed. Hadra's soldiers appear at junctions, silent as locks. New seals are pressed onto doors. The city's suspicion settles over us like dust. Vino pulls me close between shelves where the canisters gleam faintly. His voice is almost nothing. "Do not speak. Do not joke. Not today." Was that concern, I whisper, or an order? His eyes harden. Survival. When he moves away, I stand alone with Bay 7 and the ledger. The pages stare back at me, neat rows of compliance. Somewhere above, Lysandra speaks to her counsel. Somewhere else, Hadra assigns interrogations. Somewhere even deeper, men are being corrected into usefulness. And somewhere this is the thought. I cannot stop now that it exists. Someone took 2 canisters and made them vanish. The idea is a crack in a wall I assumed was solid. My pen hovers over the next entry. All I have to do is write the truth as given: a canister count, seal number, destination. All I have to do is remain a function. Instead, I do something so small it would make a revolutionary laugh. I alter 1 digit in a seal number just enough to create ambiguity later, just enough to make a trail that can't be followed cleanly. A smudge of error dressed as accident. A quiet sabotaging of the mother city's obsession with perfect record. My pulse thunders. I wait for alarms, for Hadra's hand on my collar, for Lysandra's voice in my ear naming my sin. Nothing happens. Of course nothing happens. The city is vast. Its attention is expensive. It spends it on spectacles, not on the tremor of one man's hand over ink. I close the ledger and press my palm to its cover, feeling the texture of worn leather and, beneath that, the weight of every number I have ever written. If the mother city is made of bone, then the registry is her marrow, dark, busy, and vital. I have lived inside her my whole life, believing there is no outside worth imagining. Now there is a discrepancy. Now there is proof, however small, however distant, that things can be taken from her. I return the ledger to the intake desk and resume my work with a steadiness that isn't calm, only practiced. Around me, the vaults hum and breathe and pretend nothing has changed. But inside my skull, something has shifted. A single digit out of place, a hairline fracture. And I can't stop testing it with my tongue like a loose tooth. Chapter 2: Whispers of Dissent. Chapter 2 Whispers of Dissent. Marek learned early that the mother city had a second anatomy. Above, the priestesses walked their ceremonial routes, and the bone archers drank torchlight like milk. Below, beneath the public hymns and the sanctioned silences, ran a lattice of service vanes, sump corridors, maintenance galleries, old intake shafts from prior expansions, a place where the air tasted of rust and rendered fat, and the walls sweated brine. It was there, in a hollowed cistern that had once held purification water for a temple now sealed, that Marek called his first gathering. Not a rally, not a sermon, a test. He arrived with his head down and his hands empty, because empty hands made the sentries lazy. A man who carried nothing looked like a man who had already been stripped. He passed under a collapsed revolt, where a shrine to the progenitors had been smashed and left to mildew. He counted the turns by memory rather than markers. Markers could be read by anyone. 2 figures waded inside the cistern's throat, their silhouettes cut from the dim bioluminescence that pulsed in the pipes. Harkin, once the sentry, now a man with a permanently listening posture, held a priber like a comfort object. His jaw worked constantly, as if he chewed on words he didn't dare speak. Toller, the mechanic, had grease under her nails and a coil of filament slung across her shoulder like a bandolier. She was not supposed to be here. That was the point. If only the usual suspects came, the regime would find them in a week. "You're late," Harkin whispered. Marek didn't apologize. Apologies were for those still begging the city to be kind. "I circled," he said. 2 patrols on the east duct. One of them had a new badge, Hadra's people. At the name, the air tightened. Commander Hadra's enforcement squads did not belong in maintenance levels unless someone had recently gone missing in a way that embarrassed the priesthood. Toller glanced at the cistern's mouth. "Then we shouldn't be talking." "We should be listening," Marek said. "Talking comes after." He stepped into the cistern's belly. Around its inner curve, a handful of men and women exiles, smugglers, fathers sat in the dirt as if the ground had summoned them. Each face was a variation on the same wound a life pared down to function, then discarded when it no longer served. There were 7, not counting Marek. Joran, a father with hands too gentle for his scarred knuckles, kept rubbing his thumb along a small bone pendant. He did it like prayer, or like he was trying to erase something by friction. Sen, a smuggler with eyes like wet stone, leaned against the wall and watched everyone with the disinterest of a person who had survived by never believing in anything long enough to die for it. Old Casta exile community matriarch, her hair braided with wire, sat with her back straight and her palms open. She looked at Marek as if she were weighing him the way you weighed a blade, not for shine, but for balance. 2 others kept their names withheld. That, too, was the point. Marek crouched rather than stood. Standing made him a leader. Leaders were targets. He wanted them to choose him anyway. "Thank you for coming," he said, and this time the gratitude was real. "You all know why we're here." Sen gave a soft, humorless snort. "Because you're bored." "Because we're dying slowly," Joran murmured, voice hoarse, "and some of us are tired of it." Hester's gaze didn't blink. "Speak clean, Marek. No smoke words." Marek nodded once. He liked her. She demanded plain truth, which was rare in a city that wrapped every cruelty in liturgy. "The regime thinks men are inventory," he said. "Not citizens, not bodies with wills. Inventory, counted, labeled, extracted from shelved. We've all seen the vault doors. We've all heard the prayers that make theft sound holy." No one interrupted to correct him. No one said, "Asterisk, that's just the way it is." Asterisk, that silence felt like a door unlatching. Harkin shifted, prybar scraping bone sediment. "They'll kill us if they find this." "They already kill us," Marek said, gentle but firm. "They just do it politely, slowly, with paperwork." Sen's mouth curled. "And your plan is what? Shout at the bone walls until they feel guilty." A few bitter laughs sparked and died. Marek let them. Humor was a pressure valve.
Without it, fear exploded.
My plan, Marek said, is to stop being alone. Hester's eyebrows rose a fraction. A plan that fits in one sentence is either genius or suicide.
It's the first sentence, Marek replied, not the last. He pulled a small cloth bundle from under his tunic and set it on the ground between them, palms up to show he held nothing else. The bundle looked like rags.
It smelled faintly of yeast.
Polar's eyes narrowed. What is that?
Proof, Marek said.
He unwrapped it.
Inside were three things: a strip of ration stamp paper, a shard of bone etched with a thin repeating pattern, and a brass hymn token, one of the little discs clerics used to mark attendance at public recitations.
Joran frowned.
These are nothing. They're everything, Marek said.
Because they move.
Because the city lets them move. Sen's gaze sharpened, interest finally prying through cynicism.
Go on.
Marek tapped the ration paper.
These get handed down through the lower levels.
People trade them, steal them, forge them. They pass from fingers to fingers the way truth should, if we can mark them without being noticed. Clerics check stamps, Harkin said immediately.
They'll see.
They check for the stamp, Marek said, not for the asterisk, dust asterisk. Pola's head tilted.
Dust.
Marek picked up the bone shard.
Its etched pattern was it writing? Not exactly.
It was a sequence of notches too shallow to be felt unless you knew to touch for them. There's a kind of mold, he said, that grows where the old drains still leak.
Pale, powdery.
It stains paper, but only under vinegar vapor. We can print a second message on top of the first, an invisible hymn, so to speak.
Send that out a low whistle.
You're suggesting we send letters on ration slits.
Not letters, Marek corrected.
Signals. Meeting times. Safe paths. Names to avoid. A map made of whispers. Hester leaned forward.
And the hymn token?
Marek turned the brass disc over.
On one side was the matriarchal sigil, all radiating lines and sanctified curves.
On the other, nothing. Nothing, Marek said, unless you know where to look.
He handed it to Toller. Toller's fingers worked with practiced delicacy. She turned the disc edge on, squinting. There's a seam.
A hollow, Marek said. Some tokens are cast cheap. I've seen clerics throw defective ones into scrap bins.
If we cut them, we can tuck in filament. Hair thin.
Written on with soot and salt.
Wrap it back.
No one will weigh it. Harkin shook his head. All this just to talk. All this, Marek said, so that when we act together. Joran's voice cracked.
Act how? That was the question under all questions.
It made the cistern feel smaller, the ceiling heavier.
Marek didn't answer immediately. He looked at each of them, letting his eyes settle like hands on shoulders.
First, he said, we build a chain, a network of cells that don't know the whole body, only the next link. If one breaks, the rest holds.
No heroics.
No martyrs. Martyrs make good propaganda for Lysandra. At the name matriarchal Lysandra, Kester's mouth tightened, as if tasting poison. Second, Marek continued, we choose one thing to do that changes the city's rhythm.
Something small enough to succeed, big enough to be felt.
Sen barked a laugh. You want to change the rhythm of a cathedral-state, with 7 people. With 7, Marek said. You can start a rumor that empties a street.
With 7, you can move a tool where it shouldn't be.
With 7, you can make the regime look stupid for 1 hour. And they'll punish 100 for it, Harkin said.
1,000.
The cistern went quiet. Fear returned, wearing a different mask, not fear for themselves, but fear of causing pain to others. Marek nodded, acknowledging it.
He didn't flinch away from the cost.
If he did, they would smell the lie on him.
They will, he said.
No matter what.
Because that's how control works, preemptive cruelty.
But listen to me, they punish 100 now for nothing. For a man looking the wrong way. For a woman missing a line in a hymn.
If we're going to pay in blood either way, I'd rather pay toward a debt that buys a future.
Joran stared down at his pendant. I had a son, he whispered. The words fell like something dropped from a great height. They told me he would live better because his seed came from approved stock. They told me to feel honored.
His thumb stopped rubbing. His hand clenched.
I don't know where he is, he said.
I don't know if he's alive. And he swallowed hard.
I've been quiet because quiet men get to keep breathing. Marek's voice softened. Quiet men get to keep breathing until someone decides they've had enough breath. Kester's palms closed slowly.
So you want fathers to become fighters?
I want fathers, Marek said, to become fathers again. Not donors.
Not ghosts.
Sen pushed off the wall. Idealism, he said, but the word had less contempt now, more testing curiosity.
And what do you offer the smugglers?
We're not fathers.
We're not saints. Marek met his eyes.
A city where you don't have to smuggle just to eat. A city where law isn't a priestess mood. Also, he hesitated only a moment. Access. You have roots the regime doesn't fully control.
We need them.
Sen's grin returned, thin as wire.
Finally.
A language I speak.
Toller held up the hymn token. If we do this, we need rules. No carrying both message and root on one person.
No meeting in patterns. No using names. And she glanced at Marek. No speeches in open ducts.
Your voice carries.
Marek accepted the rebuke without pride.
Agreed. Harkin swallowed. And who do we recruit?
Marek's mind flashed not to the faces in the cistern, but to the unseen vaults beneath the city, the catalogued men whose days were reduced to numbers in compliance. One in particular came unbidden, a man with tired eyes and a humor that cut like a small knife, the kind of humor that kept despair from becoming worship.
He did not speak the name aloud.
Names were hooks. People who already have one foot outside obedience, Marek said. People who keep their eyes open. People who can pass between levels without raising alarms. Catalogers. Maintenance hands.
Clerks.
The ones who touch the city's bones and know where they're brittle. Kester's gaze sharpened. You have someone in mind. Marek didn't answer. Instead, he slid the ration stamp paper toward her. Tonight, he said, we make our first whisper.
He looked to Sen. You can get this into the low food exchange.
Sen nodded once. For a price.
Marek's mouth twitched. Name it.
Not coin, Sen said.
Information.
You said Hadra's people were in the ducts.
Why?
Marek's stomach tightened.
He chose his words carefully. I don't know, he admitted.
But it means they're hunting for something that isn't lost equipment.
Harkin's grip tightened on his pry bar.
A someone.
A thin, collective inhale.
The assistant seemed to lean in, hungry for the next decision.
Toller unspooled the hair-thin filament and snapped it taut between her fingers.
If they're hunting, she said, we need a dead-drop system, not hand-to-hand.
Vent caches.
Pipe sleeves. Places only maintenance eyes will notice. Kester nodded. And we need a phrase. A way to verify a message is ours. Marek's mind sifted through the regime's own language, its hymns, its blessings, its ritual call and response. He chose something that sounded harmless, something that could be spoken in any corridor without a sentry's ears perking. The bones remember, he said. Joran blinked.
That's almost like a prayer.
It is a prayer, Marek said.
Just not to their god. They set the rules in low voices, each line another plank laid across a chasm.
Cells of 3 to 5.
No one knows more than 2 contacts outside their cell.
Messages hidden in ration papers, hymn tokens, maintenance tags.
Verification phrase asterisk the bones remember dot asterisk reply phrase asterisk so do we dot asterisk. When it was done, Marek gathered the bundle again. His fingers lingered on the etched shard.
7 people. 7 fragile lives.
It wasn't an army. It wasn't even a riot. It was a beginning small enough to survive being born.
As they prepared to leave in staggered intervals, Harkin caught Marek's sleeve.
"Listen," he whispered.
"If Hadra's squads are already in the ducts, if they are already sniffing—"
"Then we move faster," Marek said.
Harkin's eyes shone with something that wasn't quite fear anymore. "Or we die faster." Marek leaned close enough that Harkin could feel his breath, could feel the certainty Marek was forcing into his own body like medicine. "Not tonight," Marek said.
"Tonight we speak. Tomorrow," he glanced toward the cistern mouth, where the dark corridor waited like an open throat. "Tomorrow we see who hears us."
When Marek finally stepped back into the service veins, the city's vast machinery pulsed around him, a pumps thudding like giant hearts, distant hymn speakers murmuring sanctified lies, the bone walls listening with patient malice. He moved like a shadow among shadows, carrying nothing that looked like treason.
But in his mind, the first whisper had already been sent, sliding into the mother city's bloodstream on ration paper and stolen tokens. A quiet contagion.
And somewhere ahead, somewhere above, where Hadra's squads prowled and Lysandra's certainty sat enthroned, there would come a moment when the regime realized the men were no longer merely inventory. Meg felt the anticipation like a bruise you press to prove you're still alive. The bones remember, he thought.
So do we.
Chapter 3 is Secret Alliances. Chapter 3 is Secret Alliances. The maintenance tunnels were not built for walking upright. They were built for crawling men on hands and knees, men made small, men reduced to a moving shadow beneath the mother city's ribs. The walls were sheathed in cured bone laminate, polished by generations of shoulders sliding past. Every few meters a luminot pulsed like a sluggish eye. The air tasted of wet lime and old incense, and something else, the metallic sweetness that never truly left the lower levels, no matter how many sensors the clerics swung.
I shouldn't have been there. My pass late only opened the archive galleries and the counting rooms.
But passes, like prayers, work better when spoken with confidence. I walked as if I belonged to the dark. A faint click, stone on stone, answered me from ahead. "Stop breathing so loud," a voice murmured.
Marek stepped out of a service alcove where the conduit cables ran like bundled tendons.
He looked wrong down here, not because he was brave, but because he wasn't pretending.
Most men wore their obedience the way we wore the grey work cloth to avoid being noticed.
Marek wore his defiance like a bruise he refused to cover.
"You followed me," I whispered. "Or you bribed a sentry. Or—"
I waited. He said,
"You keep a schedule."
"A habit."
"It's almost devotional." "That's my job."
"No," Marek replied softly. "Your job is to make it easy for them to forget you're human."
There an unexpected clean thrust between my ribs.
I felt my mouth curl, the weary humor that kept me from screaming.
"Careful," I said.
"If you talk like that to the wrong wall will report you."
He glanced up at the luminot, as if it might sprout a listening mouth.
"These lines aren't on the Clark's maps. Polish showed me which junctions are blind." Mechanic Toller's name sat badly in my stomach.
She was a woman, a low-caste technician, more grease than ritual. She didn't look at men the way the priestesses did, with that serene entitlement, but with a kind of appraising irritation, as if we were another failing part of the machine. "So," I said, "you've got women in your little press circle now."
Marek's eyes flashed. Allies.
Not saints. He moved closer, and for a moment I thought he might grab me, drag me deeper, trade my body for his cause. But he only pressed something into my palm, a thin strip of cured membrane stamped with a spool mark.
"A cipher, I realize." "A door," he corrected.
"Ilya, I need you to say it out loud. Once."
To a living ear.
"I don't know what you think I'm holding," I said, and hated how my voice shook.
"You're mistaking me for someone with appetite." Marek cleaned his forehead briefly against the bone wall, like a man praying without a god.
"Tell me what you've seen." It wasn't the first time anyone had asked.
The clerics asked in their own way, confess your impurities, catalogue your stray thoughts, Lysandra's doctrine was simple speech as surrender, speech as proof of loyalty. Marek was asking for speech as a weapon.
I stared past him into the tunnel's throat, where the air breathed in slow drafts.
I've seen men measured like cuts of meat, I said. Weighed, tagged, filed.
I've seen the ledger marks how life gets reduced to a line and a quarter.
My throat tightened. I've seen a boy try to bite a priestess because she called him seed stuck to his face. Commander Hadra had his teeth pulled so he couldn't try again. Marek's jaw tensed at the name. Hadra not a woman of doctrine, but of procedure, a blade in uniform. I'm part of it, I added.
The words came out like vomit. I make the lists.
I keep the numbers clean.
I make it efficient.
Silence. Only the distant thrum of something enormous turning under the city, the reproductive machinery, the engines that made the mother city less a place than a living apparatus. Marek spoke carefully, as if handling a fragile jar.
Then you know where it hurts.
I know where it feeds, I said.
There's a difference. He shook his head. They want you to believe it's different.
A tremor ran through the conduit bundles, a low shudder. Somewhere above us, a mechanism engaged, and the tunnels answered like a spine underweight.
Marek turned his head slightly.
They're running the slaughter lines early.
Don't call it that, I said automatically. He looked back at me. What do you call it in the ledgers? My mouth opened, closed. I had no liturgy to hide behind down here. Reproductive processing, I whispered.
Mick's expression did not soften.
Come, if you're going to confess, do it without euphemism.
We moved deeper, past an access hatch where warmth leaked from the seams. The smell changed, first hot iron, antiseptic, the faint rot of protein waste. Then the sound arrived, a chorus of muffled moans and machine chatter, rhythmic as chanting. The hatch opened into a service gantry overlooking the line. The slaughterhouse, no. The processing hall was a nave of metal and bone, tall enough to swallow a cathedral. Racks of men moved along suspended rails, ankles strapped, wrists secured, their bodies angled like offerings. Some were sedated into blankness, some kept just awake enough to respond to commands.
The regime preferred compliance that could be recorded, measured, praised.
Below, rude clerics in aprons of waxed hide guided the bodies through stations extraction, sampling, infusion, sealing. Nothing was wasted. Not blood, not marrow, not the thin whimpering of a man who realized his future had been scheduled. A woman stood on the central dais in a mantle of pale fibers that clung like spider silk. Her hair was braided tight, her face painted with the 3 concentric circles of the fertility office. She held a rod of black glass, tapping it against a brass console as if conducting the whole hall. Brood Mistress Caris. I had only seen her before as a signature at the bottom of requisition forms. In person, she carried the calm of someone who believed the universe existed to be managed. A cleric approached her with a slate. Caris read, then flicked 2 fingers in indifferent blessing or a dismissal. A lever turned. The rail's speed increased.
Marek's hand found the gantry rail. His knuckles whitened. That's her.
Caris doesn't run doctrine, I said, because I couldn't help myself.
She runs outcomes. Explain. I should have kept my mouth shut.
But confession, once started, is a flood. Lysandra speaks the law, I murmured. Hadra enforces the law. Caris makes sure the law produces children.
She sets the quotas.
She signs the harvest schedules. Her office decides which districts breed and which districts get culled for purity maintenance. Marek's eyes flicked to the line.
And the men? I swallowed. We're inventory.
When a district's mothers petition for a stronger cohort, Caris draws from the vaults. When Lysandra declares a cleansing, Hadra delivers bodies. Caris turns bodies into continuation. Below, one of the strapped men began to thrash.
Not violently, just a desperate, animal motion, as if his muscles could argue with straps.
A brood cleric leaned close and murmured something I couldn't hear. The man's face crumpled in gratitude at the attention, the way starving things thank the hand that cages them.
Marek's voice came out like ground glass.
This is what they call holy.
I forced myself to keep looking.
It was easier, in a way, than pretending the sounds were only machines. A second-tier clerk in a green sash archivist Vino paced along the floor with a stack of slates, checking serials against wrists. Vino's job was my cousin's job to translate bodies into numbers without flinching.
Marek noticed him too. You know that one.
Yes, I said. He'll report any irregularity.
He thinks it's piety. Marek's mouth tightened. Then we don't give him irregularities. We give him different numbers. He turned to me fully then, his face stark in the gantry's sick light.
Ilya, your access your ledgers. You can make men vanish on paper.
I barked a humorless laugh. And where do you imagine they go? Into a poem.
Into the sky.
Into the tunnels, he said. Into the smugglers' hands. Out.
The word *out* felt mythological.
I stared down at Karis's dais.
You think you can steal from the womb of the city and not be noticed?
I think, Marek said, that they've built something so big they've stopped believing anything small can harm it. A bell rang 3 notes like a broken hymn.
Karis lifted her rod, and the hall answered with motion.
New bodies rolled in, old bodies rolled out. The machine did not care which was which.
Marek touched my palm, where the cipher strip lay.
Tonight,
Sister 9, the smugglers want to see your face before they trust your information. You already have smugglers, I said.
Exiles,
he corrected. People who live between cities. People who still remember the sky is more than one color.
And they'll help men? The question sounded stupid even as I asked it.
No one helped men unless it benefited women. Marek's gaze didn't waver.
They'll help us because Karis has been tightening the roots.
Because Hadra's patrols have been burning their caches.
Because the mother city doesn't tolerate anything it can't classify. He leaned closer.
Because fear makes unusual families.
Sister 9 was a hollow under an old aqueduct, a place where the city's bones sweated mineral tears. The water level sat low, exposing a ring of algae-stained steps and a flat platform where someone had dragged in crates to serve as tables.
3 figures waited in the dark, not priestesses,
not clerks. Their clothing was layered and patched, with the kind of practical stitching you never saw in the mother city fabric meant to survive, not symbolize. A woman with a scar splitting her eyebrow stepped forward first.
Her hair was cropped short, her posture that of someone used to wind and distance. Name, she said, flat as a blade. Ilya, I replied, and felt Marek's presence at my shoulder like a hand on a weapon. The woman's eyes moved over me with cool calculation. You look like Ledger.
He is, Marek said. That's why we brought him.
A man beside her, older, with a net of fine tattoos along his throat, snorted. A city man.
Soft.
Marek's voice sharpened.
Soft doesn't mean useless.
The scarred woman gestured toward the crates.
Sit.
Speak fast. Patrols doubled on the lower ring since last cycle. Commander Hadra, I muttered before I could stop myself. At the name, all 3 of them shifted in instinctive tightening, so Hadra's reputation reached beyond the bone walls.
Good. Terrifying, but useful.
Marek placed the cipher strip on the crate table.
We can open a service door into the processing levels twice a week. Shift change.
The sentries hearken he drinks. He can be bought with heat tabs and silence. The tattooed man barked a laugh.
Everybody drinks down here.
Yes, Marek said, but Harkin drinks until he forgets what he's loyal to. The scarred woman looked at me again.
And what do you bring, Ledger man? My mouth went dry. This wasn't a confession now.
This was negotiation. I can alter transfer records, I said. Make a man's serial appear reassigned to Karis's pilot program, one of the experimental cohorts. Those bodies move under heavier secrecy, fewer eyes, fewer questions. The 3rd smuggler, a lean youth with a grease smear on his cheek, whistled softly.
You can hide men in privilege.
Not privilege, I said.
Bureaucracy.
The city worships procedure.
If the procedure says do not look, most people won't.
Marek nodded once, as if confirming something he already believed.
We trade them information, routes,
patrol timing. In return, they move the men out through the waste vents. Exiles know how to breathe bad air. The scarred woman tapped the crate with 2 fingers.
And what do we get when the mother city notices a few men missing and burns the tunnels?
You get the satisfaction of making them bleed, Max said.
That's not currency, she replied. That's poetry.
Marek's face hardened.
Then you get leverage.
Harris's quotas depend on steady supply. Disrupt the supply, and the mothers above start tearing each other apart. You'll have a city busy with internal knives instead of hunting you. The tattooed man leaned in.
You're asking us to start a famine.
Marek didn't flinch.
I'm asking you to start a choice. They were silent.
In that silence, I heard the city around us, a water dripping, distant engines, the soft crackle of lumen wires, a living thing dreaming of control. Finally, the scarred woman nodded once. 1 run. Proof.
You give us 1 man who would otherwise go to Karis's line, and we'll show you we can move him beyond Hadra's net. Marek exhaled, agreed. Her gaze slid to me. If you betray us, Ledger Man, we won't bother killing you. We'll return you to Karis with a ribbon and a confession.
My weary humor surfaced, bitter and reflexive.
How thoughtful.
I do love ceremony.
Marek's hand closed briefly around my shoulder, not gentle, but anchoring.
No betrayal, he said, more to me than to them.
I should have felt inspired.
Instead, I felt nauseous, because now the conspiracy had weight, a plan,
a timetable, a body attached. As we left the cistern, Marek guided me through a narrow conduit where the wall pulsed faintly with heat and artery line running to the reproductive halls.
They'll notice, I whispered.
Yes, Marek replied.
And when they do, they'll tighten everything.
Harris will push quotas.
Lysandra will preach purity. Hadra will start pulling men out of dorms at random to make the fear fresh.
I thought of Karis's rod tapping her console, the rail speed increasing.
Thought of Vino's neat slates. Thought of Harkin's string blurred eyes. And what happens to me, I asked, when the city begins looking for the person who made the numbers lie?
Marek's answer came without romance.
Then you'll stop being a witness.
We reached a junction, where the tunnels forked, one path back toward my sanctioned corridors, one deeper into the unlit underworks, where Marek moved like a native creature. Before he left, he caught my wrist and pressed something into my hand, not the cipher strip this time, but a small, hard object, an enamel token stamped with Karis's office seal.
A requisition marker. I breathed. Marek's eyes were very steady.
Your first theft. You'll need it to move a body past the brute clerics.
Tomorrow night, during second shift. Choose someone who can walk.
I closed my fingers around the token.
It felt heavy with blasphemy. Above us, through layers of bone and metal, the mother city continued its ritual songs, sermons, patrol marches.
It did not yet know it had made room in its ribs for something new, a secret alliance, small as a splinter, placed where the heartwork throbbed.
Marek slipped into the dark.
I stood alone at the fork, token sweating in my palm, and for the first time in my life I understood the true obscenity of the system I serve. It wasn't that men were used. It was that we were expected to be grateful for the privilege of being consumed.
Tomorrow night, I would have to choose a man to steal. And if I failed, if I hesitated, if I tried to become a ghost again, Karis's machinery would keep singing without me.
I turned toward my sanctioned corridors, rehearsing my face for the clerks and the cameras, already feeling the city's attention like a cold hand searching for a pulse it could name. Chapter 4, Cracks in the Armor. Chapter 4, Cracks in the Armor.
The mother city had its own weather. Not the ash sleet that scoured the outer buttresses under the starless dome Hadra could taste that in her teeth, metallic and old, but the interior climate warm exhalations from the breeding vaults, cold drafts from ossuary galleries, the sterile breath of the gene laboratories, air that moved the way a throat swallowed, air that carried whispers. Hadra walked the corridor of rib arches, helm under her arm, throat seal unlatched because she wanted to hear.
She told herself that was discipline. A commander who could not hear the city could not hold it.
2 ritual clerics stood at a side niche where a saint's femur had been set in bold wire. They didn't notice her at first. Their hoods made them confident and stupid.
Their voices were soft, but bone carried sound every arch a tuning fork.
The Father's hymns, one said, quick and anxious.
They've started again.
In the lower service warrens, a man's voice, not a cantor's.
Not approved. Men don't hymn, the other cleric snapped, as if the denial could cauterize the fear. They whimper. This one didn't. It wasn't worship. It was counting. Names.
Like an index. Hadra slowed without stopping, letting her boots strike the flagstones at a steady cadence. She felt the old reflex step in, seize tongues, make an example. That was what Lysandra had built her into, a fist with a brain. But the first cleric continued, and the words found their way under Hadra's armor, where sweat lived. And the sentry says the catalogers have stopped reporting accurately.
Numbers don't match. Missing stock.
Stock doesn't go missing, the second said, voice cracking. Stock is inventoried. Hadra passed the niche and did not turn her head. She kept walking until the corridor forked into an artery that fed the council spire. Only then did she exhale.
Missing stocks.
If men were vanishing from the vaults, it meant one of 2 things: someone was stealing from the harvest, or the harvest was leaking. Either possibility was treason. Both were more dangerous than treason. They were proof that the mother city's body was not sealed. At the foot of the spire, a sentry in bronze lamelleur snapped to attention. Harkin Scar along the jaw, a veteran of border skirmishes whose eyes never stopped moving. "Commander," he said.
Hadra let her gaze hold him a fraction longer than protocol required. "You've heard the same air I've heard."
Harkin's throat bobbed. "Rumors, Commander. Lower Warren talk. Rumors are how rot announces itself before the flesh blackens."
She stepped closer until her shadow swallowed his boots. "Who's been whispering?"
He hesitated. That alone was an answer. The whispers weren't only among men. "Say it," Hadra ordered. "Quiet." "Acolytes," Harkin admitted.
"2 night cleaners."
"One of the bone masons."
"They say." He swallowed again.
"They say men are being moved without writ, taken off ledgers."
"Taken to old tunnels."
Hadra's mouth tightened.
"And you told me this one." "I was waiting for confirmation."
Hadra almost laughed.
"Confirmation.
In the mother city, you could confirm anything if you bled enough people to make it true." She leaned in.
"You will not wait again."
"You will come to me with smoke before it becomes flame." "Yes, Commander." She left him and climbed.
The council chamber sat in the mother city's skull and ovoid vault, whose ceiling was a lattice of polished bone and dark glass, through which the faint pulse of the ancient sun below could be seen like a heart behind ribs. The matriarchal seat was a throne carved from a single vertebra the size of a ship's keel, wrapped in prayer script.
Lysandra was already there, composed as a statue that had learned to speak. Beside her, brood Mistress Kara's thick hands, practical eyes stood with a data plate clutched like a rosary. Archivist Vino, pale and ink-stained, hovered near the recordes. Several lesser matrons filled the semicircle of governors, priest-engineers, a logistics seer whose pupils had been replaced with auger lenses. Hadra took her place at the iron lectern, the only metal allowed in that room. The council liked to pretend they were beyond the old wars, beyond the crude age of blades. Hadra's presence was their concession that the world remained crude anyway. Lysandra lifted 2 fingers. The room quieted, as if sound itself had been commanded. "We are here," the matriarchal said. "Voice a controlled liturgy, because our city has developed noise." Harris snorted softly, too softly to be open dissent, but Hadra heard it. Karis had always hated the oracle's euphemisms. Lysandra continued. "Reports, deviations, unclean patterns in the harvest and in the lower.
Say dissent, Karis cut in, unable to hold it. You mean dissent? A hush.
Vino's stylus froze. Lysandra turned her head 1 degree. Broodmistress, you forget yourself. Karis lifted her chin.
No, I remember myself. I remember the last time we called it noise and lost an entire outpost to famine because no one wanted to name what was happening.
A murmur rippled among the matrons. Hadra watched their faces controlled, powdered, but strained at the edges.
Cracks under enamel.
Lysandra's gaze slid to Hadra, as if to remind the room what consequences looked like.
Commander, you have been among the corridors.
Speak. Hadra's throat felt suddenly too narrow for words. She hated that sensation more than wounds. There are rumors, she said. Men being moved off ledger. Non-compliant chanting in the service warrens. Clerics hearing names spoken aloud. One of the governors clicked her teeth. Men don't have names.
They have tags.
They have mouths, Hadra replied. The bluntness earned her a quick look from Lysandra warning her approval. Hadra couldn't tell any more. The logistics seers Orgelens's word. Our predictive models show a rise in variance. The city's obedience index has fallen by 3 points.
Karis slammed her data plate onto the stone. 3 points? We're bleeding breeding stock, and you give me points.
Breeding stock is replaceable, another matron said, voice sweet as poison. Order is not.
Karis rounded. Replaceable? You think men grow on the bone trees? We have quarters.
We have outer provinces failing.
We have shipments delayed because our enforcers keep requisitioning transport for spectacle.
Hadra felt heat under her collar. Spectacle meant raids, public punishments, processions. Hadra's work made ceremonial so the city could pretend violence was prayer. Lysandra raised her hand again. Enough. We will not devolve into old market shouting. The mother city is an organism. When an organ spasms, one does not argue about blame.
One excises the spasm.
Excise too much and you kill the patient, Kara shot back. Silence fell like a blade. Hadra saw it then, cleared as a schematic. Karis wasn't merely angry. She was afraid. Afraid not of men, but of collapse.
And that fear had reached the council.
The matriarchal certainty so absolute it had once seemed divine now had to compete with math, logistics, hunger. Vino cleared his throat, a timid sound in a room of predators. Matriarchal, if I may. The archives have noted irregular access to lower catalog records. Someone has been querying genealogy lines without authorization. Lysandra's eyes sharpened.
Who?
Vino's hands trembled. The queries are masked.
But the pattern suggests an internal user with clearance, not a man.
A new murmur, this one edged with panic. Hadra watched the matrons glance at one another. Suspicion was a solvent. Lysandra spoke softly. Commander Hadra, your steel will find the leak. It always has.
Hadra wanted to answer automatically yes. Matron, it will. For the mother city.
For order. Instead, something else rose, an image of those clerics whispering about men speaking names.
Not tags. Names.
Like a person daring to exist.
She kept her face rigid. I will investigate.
And Lysandra added, you will increase compliance sweeps, the lower warrens, the gene vault access points, the ossuary passages.
I want bodies counted twice.
Karis's lips parted, then closed.
She swallowed whatever argument she'd almost made. Even she knew that openly opposing Lysandra in front of the council would be inviting a knife disguised as a blessing.
Hadra inclined her head.
As commanded. The council dissolved slowly, like a carcass being picked clean.
Matrons clustered into small circles, hissing counsel. Vino fled with his stylus. Karis stayed behind, waiting until even the lesser governors had departed. When only Lysandra, Karis, and Hadra remained, the chamber felt larger and more intimate, like being inside a skull with the brain removed. Karis spoke first, voice lower.
Commander, if you turn the lower warrens inside out, you'll crush labor. We already have maintenance delays.
Mechanic Tolus says the under engines are coughing. Lysandra's mouth curved, not a smile an expression of ownership.
Let them cough.
The city has endured worse. Hadra surprised herself by asking, and if the coughing is from within? Not sabotage, not dissent.
Fatigue.
Lysandra's gaze fixed on her. Fatigue is a word men use.
We do not fatigue. We persist.
Hadra held the oracle's eyes and felt, for the first time in years, the urge to look away. Terrace shifted, sensing the danger.
Matriarchal, we can persist and still adjust.
Tighten security without. Without turning the whole city into a snare, Hadra supplied silently, without making dissent the only way to breathe. Lysandra ended it with 2 words.
Commander, go.
Hadra left the skull chamber, with her jaw clenched so tight it ached.
She descended into her command station, an iron organ grafted onto the city's bone. Her aides stood like carved figures behind consoles of ember glass.
Data flowed in pale streams, surveillance feeds flickered with corridors and vault doors and ritual processions, the city watching itself.
An officer approached at her half-ron, saluted with fist asternum.
Commander Hadra.
Priority intelligence from the outer garrison and the low watch.
Hadra took the sealed slate, thumbed and coded it. Lines of text crawled up, each one a hairline fracture spreading. *** incident barracks 9. *** 2 squads refused morning litany.
Claimed ration discrepancy.
Sergeant invoked maternal law to challenge quartermaster.
Altercation. 1 enforcer injured.
**Incident South Causeway Post. Watch rotation failed.
3 sentries absent.
Their armor found stacked neatly with tags removed.
No bodies.
**Incident Ossuary lift for. Operator lost controls and attempted descent without clearance. Cited orders from below.
Apprehended.
Self-inflicted tongue removal before questioning. Hadra stared until the words lost their meaning and became only shapes.
Small mutinies.
Not a riot yet. Discrete fractures.
Points of refusal.
Men didn't have authority to mutiny, sentries did.
Operators did.
People inside her own structure were testing the edges of command. Her aide, a young woman with a scarred scalp and an eager expression, waited for orders.
Commander.
Hadra's voice came out rougher than she intended.
Quarantine barracks 9.
No executions yet.
The aide blinked. No.
No, Hadra repeated, letting the word land. I want the sergeant alive. I want to know what phrase she used.
Maternal law, that's council language.
Someone taught her to weaponize it. Yes, Commander. Hadra continued reading, eyes snagging on the detail that made her stomach sink. Armor stacked neatly, tags removed.
That wasn't panic. That was ritual.
Someone was giving disobedience a shape the city could recognize. She thought of the cleric's whisper, a man counting names like an index. Hadra keyed the intercom to Harkin's post. Sentry Harkin. Report to command. A pause, then on my way, Commander. Hadra cut the line and sat back, helm still under her arm like a severed head.
In the reflection of the console glass, she saw her own face, hard lines, eyes that had learned not to flinch.
She had been Lysandra's instrument for so long that she'd mistaken it for identity. The mother's city demanded certainty, demanded clean divisions, ruler and ruled, matron and stock, command and obedience. Now the divisions were smearing. Hadra looked at the intelligence slate again, tongue removed to avoid questioning, armor stacked like an offering, refused litany over rations.
Missing sentries. These were not the actions of people who expected mercy.
They were the actions of people who had found something stronger than fear. For the first time in her service, Hadra did not immediately plan how to crush it.
She planned how to understand it.
And that, she knew coldly, clearly was the first true crack in her armor. Chapter 5, The Spark Ignites. Chapter 5, The Spark Ignites. The bone key was warm from my palm when I slid it into the lock.
That should have been my first warning. Nothing in the lower reliquaries was ever warm. The mother city kept her secrets cold marrow, cold incense, cold arithmetic, so that men like me would stop expecting the world to notice we were alive. But tonight the luck answered like flesh. The tumbler clicked with a soft, intimate give, and the door seemed inhaled. A ribbon of preservative air spilled out over my knuckles, sharp as vinegar, and sanctified with whatever prayers the clerics used to bless stolen futures. Behind me, in the maintenance corridor, Toller stood with a lantern hooded under her coat. Mechanic's hands, oil blackened to the wrists, holding a coil of wire like it was a rosary. Her eyes never stopped moving. "You're late," she whispered. "I'm punctual," I murmured back. "The city is enthusiastic." That earned the smallest twitch from her mouth, half a smile, half a flinch, a sound, somewhere above, like a colossal throat clearing, the ossuary engine cycling its breath. Toller leaned close enough that I could smell metal on her skin. "Once you step inside, you don't turn clever again. You turn committed." "I've been committed for years," I said, "because I needed the joke to keep my ribs from cracking. They keep my file in the nice cabinet." She didn't laugh. "Ilya." Her saying my name like that plainly, without ritual, was its own sabotage. I looked through the opening. Rows of jean vitrines glimmered in the dark like drowned stars, each one tagged, catalogued, prayed over, a whole theology of ownership in glass and bone. The reliquary wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was orderly. Behind this door lived the proof that the mother city could take anything from us and then call it peace. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I stepped inside not to count their treasures but to spoil them. Marek's plan hadn't been delivered like the others, no murmured someday, no fevered speech that left everyone feeling holy and helpless. He'd brought it like an engineer brings a schematic, folded, precise, stained with fingerprints. We met in the unused spillway beneath the east hatchery, where the old water channels had been repurposed into crawl spaces and confessionals. The smugglers' cell had brought maps burned onto vellum-thin plastic. The fathers, those who still wore the look of being allowed to touch their own children, once brought a silence that weighed more than any weapon. Marek stood with his back to a wall of calcified pipes. In the lantern light his face looked carved too sharp, too awake. He didn't pace. He didn't perform. He simply pointed. "3 mother cities," he said, voice low. "Not just ours." A murmur went through the group. Hark! In the sentry sucking air between his teeth, Vino the archivist blinking hard like he'd been struck. "Coordinated?" Vino asked. "We can barely." Marek cut him off with a raised hand. "Not cruel. Certain. We can. We have to. If this becomes a single sore, they cauterize it. If it becomes a fever, they have to choose what organ to save." Toller shifted beside me. I felt her shoulder brush mine, an accidental tether. Marek's finger moved along the map. Exile routes to the salt flats will carry messages in timing. Smugglers will seed the false manifests. Mutinous squads in the South Garrison, yes. I know you don't like trusting soldiers, will stall Hadra's response on the roads. Hawkins snorted, assuming Hadra doesn't just hang the lot and march anyway. "She might," Marek said, "so we make marching expensive." He looked at me then, not pleading, not flattering, just naming. "And the reliquary," Marek said, "is where we make it expensive." The group's eyes slid toward me. I wanted to protest, to perform my usual trick of being the man who sees everything and touches nothing. My tongue even found the start of a sentence. Asterisk, I only catalogue. I don't asterisk, but it died in my mouth. Because they were watching me like I was already a weapon. Marek took a breath. "We don't need fire. We need doubt." He tapped the reliquary marker. Ilya changes the record. Not one record. Thousands. Enough that the next harvest cycle becomes a roulette wheel. Enough that Lysandra's clerics begin accusing one another of heresy. Enough that the broodmistresses lose confidence in the math. Broodmistress Karis's name wasn't spoken, but I felt it anyway, felt her gaze in my memory, the way she'd once told me, almost kindly, that I was a necessary sadness.
Vino swallowed. If the lineages become unreliable, Marek finished, they will slow.
They will investigate.
They will turn inward. That buys us time to move bodies out of the pens. Slow?
Harkin asked.
Marek's smile came thin and sharp. Then they keep harvesting in the dark. Nobody spoke for a moment. The ossuary engine thrummed through the pipes, a lullaby for monsters. I heard my own voice, like it belonged to someone braver. What do you need from me? Marek's eyes softened not into mercy, but into recognition.
One act, he said. Your first honest act.
After that, you'll know what you are.
I hated him for how cleanly he said it.
I hated him more for being right. The sabotage itself wasn't dramatic. Not at first. It was paperwork, which is how the mother city likes her violence stamped, indexed, and blessed.
The reliquary terminal set in alcoves of polished bone, each screen hooded by ribs.
I moved through them like a ghost with a badge, my cataloger's sigil opening doors without question.
That was the true obscenity of my position. I didn't need to fight the system to access its heart. I'd been invited.
Tola waited by the coolant manifold, wire ready. Her task was to make sure the surveillance blinked at the right time, just long enough to make my hands invisible to the watching saints. You're shaking, she whispered.
I'm always shaking, I said, and tried to make it sound like a joke instead of a prayer. At the nearest terminal, I slotted my Iden bone and watched my own credentials bloom on the screen. *** Ilya gene catalog authorized. ***.
Authorized to ruin lives. Authorized to preserve theft.
I'd opened the lineage ledger.
Names scroll past, men reduced to alphanumeric hymns. I felt bile rise, not from disgust alone, but from the intimacy of it. I recognized some of them. The way you recognize the dead when you've lived among coffins long enough. Marek's instructions were simple in concept and terrifying in execution.
1. Introduce false maternal attributions across multiple houses.
2.
Duplicate high-value donor markers into low-value files. 3. Corrupt the checks and prayers, those little ritualized strings the clerics insisted were purity seals, but which were really just verification codes with incense smeared on them.
If I did it wrong, alarms would scream.
If I did it right, nothing would happen tonight.
Nothing, except a future collapsing.
My finger hovered over the first overwrite, a single keystroke,
a minor sin. Then I thought of Marek's map, 3 cities, not one, a fever, not a sore. I thought of the fathers in the spillway, their silence like a verdict. I thought unexpectedly of Commander Hadra, not as a monster, but as a woman who had built her life on obedience and would now be asked to slaughter for arithmetic that might be rotten. My hand dropped.
The terminal accepted the change with a polite chime.
I didn't feel triumphant.
I felt nauseous,
like I'd finally admitted what kind of man I was, not harmless, just waiting. Toller's wire snapped into the manifold with a quiet *click*. The surveillance node above us dimmed for exactly 6 seconds, long enough for my hands to become rumor.
I worked faster.
1 ledger became 10. 10 became 50. The reliquary's order began to fray. Invisible as mold, I salted their purity seals with errors so subtle they'd pass nightly audits and bloom only when the next harvest cycle tried to reconcile womb to record, own to prayer.
At the final terminal, I paused. There was a function I'd never used.
A sealed protocol, ** emergency quarantine reliquary. ***. It existed for contamination events, plagues, sabotage, heresy. It would lock the gene vitrines behind thicker doors, trigger clerical review, slow the pipeline, slow the harvest. It would also, inevitably, point to an inside actor.
To me. Toller saw my hesitation. "Don't," she'd breathed.
Marek said. I know what Marek said. I whisper. My thumb hovered. The ossuary engines cycled again, like something dreaming. I pressed it. The screen flashed. A soft gong sounded somewhere deep, like a bell underwater. The reliquary doors began to seal, bone plates sliding into place with the patient finality of a tomb. Tola swore under her breath. "You just painted a target on your spine." "I've had a target on my spine since I was born," I said. My voice sounded calm. That frightened me more than the alarm would have.
We slipped out through the maintenance corridor as the seals completed behind us.
No sirens, no shouting. Just the city, continuing to pretend it was eternal. By dawn the pretending cracked. I was back in a cataloguing hall when the first reports came, runners in clerical veils, breathless, eyes wide with the terror of being forced to speak unscripted words. Vino sat across from me, ink-stained and twitching, pretending to work. Neither of us looked at the other, because looking would be confession. The doors at the far end slammed open. Commander Hadra strode in with two mutinous-looking soldiers at her back, mutinous only in the way they avoided meeting anyone's gaze. Hadra's armor was unadorned bone plate, practical as a guillotine. Her face was harder than usual, as if she'd filed it down overnight. A ritual cleric hurried beside her, voice thin. South Quarter has his men in the streets.
Not just men.
Some women. They pulled down the fertility banners. Hadra's attention snapped like a whip.
"How many?"
"Dozens," the cleric stammered.
"Then hundreds."
"And the exiles at the salt gate, there were shots. A depot burned." Hadra's jaw worked once. She turned toward the inner sanctum where matriarchal Lysandra would be waiting with incense and certainty.
"And the other cities?"
Hadra asked.
The cleric's face went pale.
"Similar unrest."
"Coordinated, like timing."
Hadra's eyes flicked across the hall, briefly landing on me. I felt it like a knife tip between my ribs. Not recognition, she didn't know. Not yet, but calculation. The look of a woman who can smell a change in the air and hates it.
Another runner arrived, nearly colliding with the table.
"Commander, the gene reliquary sealed itself overnight. Quarantine protocol engaged. The clerics are calling it." "Heresy," Hadra finished, voice flat.
The word hit the room like a thrown stone.
A few clerks made warding gestures. Someone began to whisper a prayer. Hadra didn't pray.
She pointed.
"Lock down the lower levels. Pull every access log.
Bring me the catalogers on duty within the last 12 hours.
Bring me the mechanic rosters.
Now." Teller wasn't in the room. Good.
For the moment.
Vino's pen snapped in his fingers. He stared at the broken tip like it had betrayed him.
Hadra took one step toward the sanctum, then stopped as if a thought had hooked her spine. "To the cleric," she said, "tell Lysandra the harvest schedule is compromised." The cleric hesitated, caught between fear of Hadra and fear of the oracle, Commander the matron. Hadra's voice lowered. "Tell her," she repeated, "that if she wants her rituals performed on time, she will let me do my work without sermons."
That was the first time I'd ever heard Commander Hadra speak to Lysandra's authority like it was merely another obstacle.
Hadra turned, armor rasping, and addressed the hall with the bluntness of a blade. "There's it is unrest. There will be punishment. Anyone found aiding it will be made an example in the central nave."
Her gaze swept again, colder now.
"And anyone who thinks this is a story they can watch is about to become part of it." Then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of iron and inevitability. Around me, the cataloguing hall shivered into motion, clerks scrambling, prayers whispered, fear metabolizing into obedience. Inside my chest, something else moved too. Not fear.
Not exactly.
A kind of clarity.
Marek had promised me one honest act. He'd been wrong about one thing. It didn't end there. It started there. Under the tables, my hand found a hidden seam in my coat where I'd tucked a scrap of vellum, Marek's last instruction, written in code only a desperate man would call poetry. Outside, far above our bone ceilings, The mother city's morning bells began to ring, not the gentle call to ritual, but the harsh alarm that meant the city had noticed itself bleeding.
The spark had caught, and the fire, I realized with a sick, liberating calm, would not ask my permission to spread.
Chapter 6 Ashes of the Old Order. Chapter 6 Ashes of the Old Order. The city didn't wake.
It convulsed. Sirens, the old throat sounds of the mother city, howled from within the bone spires as if the architecture itself had learned to scream. The starless sky above the ossuary domes stayed the same color as always, bruce, indifferent. But down in the streets, the air filled with something rarer than incense.
Choice.
Marek shoved a scrap mask into my hands.
The filter was made from reprocessed nursery gauze and a strip of ledge leather. I recognized the stitching. Archivist Vinos. Put it on, Marek said. His voice was too steady, as if he'd poured all his fear into someone else's cup.
They're burning the lactree stores.
Smoke'll blind you before a bullet does.
Bullets are new, I muttered, but I tied the mask anyway. My fingers didn't want to obey. Nothing in me had been trained for this, only for counting, cataloguing, kneeling, and pretending that the numbers were not people. From the maintenance hatch we watched the boulevard choke with bodies.
Not just men, though there were plenty of us. Many with shaved heads and prison-sallow faces, but also the ones the regime had always called asterisk functionaries, asterisk mechanics, carriers, splicers, the midwives who had learned to hate what their hands did. Even a few clerics, their robes turned inside out to hide the embroidery of Lysandra's sigils.
Above them all, the cathedral-states' outer ribs arched like the jaws of a fossilized god. Between the ribs, the matriarchal's banners snapped ivory cloth painted with womb crescents, slick with rain and soot.
The first explosions weren't elegant. They weren't holy. They were made from stolen fuel pellets and cracked engine casings.
They blossomed beneath the security pylons and tore them open like rotted fruit. A pylon fell in slow motion, trailing wires and teeth, and the crowd surged through the breach as if they'd been waiting their whole lives to remember how to run. Go, Marek said.
We went.
The streets ran red with conflict, but not all the red was blood. The regime's sacramental dyes spilled from ruptured reliquary carts, mixing with gore into a smeared, pink sludge that made the cobbles slick. A mutinous soldier, one of Hadra's, fired into the air to scatter us, and the shot took a hanging lantern instead, showering hot fat and glass. The crowd howled, listened pain, then in something feral and long-starved, the sound of obedience breaking. Sentry Harkin appeared out of the smoke like a nightmare I'd had too many times. He was in partial armor, the black plates edged and bone-white, his face bare and wet with rain.
He aimed his rifle toward us. I froze.
Reflex is a ritual too. Harkin's gaze found mine recognition. A flicker of contempt and then slid past.
His barrel lifted, not at me but at a regime clerk sprinting toward a comm station. The clerk fell without a sound.
Harkin spat and shouted, "Keep moving.
Don't let them get to the Vox." I stared, not understanding.
Betrayal is supposed to look like treachery, not like an order barked with the same old authority. Marek grabbed my sleeve.
He's with us, or with himself. It doesn't matter. Move.
We moved, and the city's familiar geometry turned unfamiliar under violence.
The bone arches that used to shepherd us into queues now funneled us into kill corridors.
The propaganda pylons, those tall, whispering things that fed Lysandra's liturgies into the streets, crackled and began to speak in broken loops. Asterisk mothers endure, asterisk, asterisk mothers endure, asterisk, until someone threw a brick through the throat grill and the voice died mid-syllable.
We fought like people who had never been allowed to learn how.
The smugglers, self-faces wrapped, hands who had passed out real weapons, a compact slug-throwers, shock batons scavenged from Hadra's armories, even a few antique blades that looked obscene in this age of sterilized suffering. Mechanic Toller came barreling past with a satchel of charges. She had grease on her cheeks like war paint and a grin that didn't belong in this city. "Down,"
she yelled. We flattened ourselves against an ossified storefront as she slapped the charges onto the base of a shrine statue, a marble mother with her arms full of infants that were never meant to grow.
The blast broke the statue in half. The mother's face sheared away, revealing a hollow interior full of hidden vox amplifiers and surveillance filaments. Polar laughed once, harsh.
It was listening the whole time.
And then, from above, the iron voice of the regime answered. A gunship, one of the cathedral's winged engines, plated in bone and humming with the low, eldritch vibration that always made my teeth ache, swept down the boulevard.
Its underslung cannons angled toward the crowd, and for a second I saw my own death as a tidy, administrative entry.
Marek raised a flare pistol and fired directly into the gunship's intake, as if courage could aim physics. The flare arc too slow, too bright, and for a heartbeat I thought it would miss. A second flare joined it. Then a third. From rooftops and broken windows, insurgents fired skyward in coordinated timing. The flares struck the intake grills where the engine's sanctified filters sat, filters maintained by men like me, once, hands trembling under Hadra's inspections. The flares burned white-hot, and the gunship's hum became a scream. It veered, clipped a bone arch, and crashed into a procession hall. The explosion folded the hall inward, sending a rain of ivory fragments down like teeth.
The crowd roared.
Not victory, something more dangerous, belief. Marek looked at me, eyes bright behind his mask.
They can bleed, he said. They can asterisk, full asterisk. I didn't answer.
I was watching the smoke where the gunship had been, imagining Lysandra somewhere above it all, calm as a sermon. We didn't have to imagine long.
The cathedral-states' main gates, two slabs of lacquered bone carved with genealogies, opened. Commander Hadra strode out with her guard phalanx, armor intact, hair bound tight, face unreadable in the way only the truly violent can manage. Behind her walked ritual clerics with censers swinging, their incense trying to rewrite the air into obedience.
Hadra's voice cut through the chaos, amplified without technology, a commander's shout honed into a blade.
"Disperse," she ordered. "Return to function. Lay down weapons and you will be processed with mercy." The word asterisk, mercy asterisk, sounded wrong in her mouth, like a tool used for the first time.
The insurgents hesitated. Even now, a part of the city's body remembered how to fear her. Then a shot cracked from Hadra's left flank.
One of her own lieutenants, Saren, the woman with the scar across her scalp and the dead eyes who used to oversee the mail vaults, had turned her rifle not on us, but on the clerics. A census winner went down, his incense spilling into the mud.
Saren fired again, and another cleric fell, the embroidered wound sigil on her chest blooming into wet black. Hadra's head snapped toward Saren.
For the first time, I saw something move in her expression, not surprise, but insult, as if betrayal was a procedural error.
"Saren," Hadra said, voice low. Saren didn't flinch. "Orders changed," she replied. "The matron lied. The city's starving. Your armories are empty.
Your miracles are counterfeit."
Hadra took a single step forward. Her guard shifted uneasily. Some raised weapons toward Saren. Others, too many, did not. Hadra's gaze swept her phalanx, counting loyalty like ammunition. I watched her realize, in real time, that she had been commanding a machine that had already begun to dismantle itself.
"Who else?"
Hadra demanded. No one answered aloud.
But the silence was an answer.
Marek, reckless as ever, stepped into the open. "Hadra," he shouted, "stand down. Let Lysandra answer for what she's done." Hadra's eyes found him.
I expected contempt.
Instead, I saw tired fury, someone who had spent a life being the fist of a god and was now watching the god's altar burn. "You think you can steer this?" Hadra called back.
"You think a mob becomes a state because it learns to kill?"
Marek didn't hesitate. "It becomes a state because it learns to refuse." Hadra barked a laugh with no humor.
"Refusal is a luxury." Then, above us, the cathedral-states upper balcony flared with light. Matriarchal Lysandra appeared, draped in pale robes that made her look carved rather than born. Her attendants clustered behind her like an extension of her will. The balcony's bone rail was etched with the names of mothers who had died in childbirth centuries ago, martyrs used as masonry.
Lysandra raised her hands. The crowd's roar faltered.
Not because we loved her, but because some old part of our nervous system still recognized her as the voice of reality.
My children, Lysandra intoned, and even through smoke and screaming her words landed cleanly, too clean. The city is a womb. You are tearing it open. You are spilling the future into the gutter. Someone threw a stone. It fell short. Lysandra's eyes scanned the street with serene disgust. The harvest was mercy. She continued. The vaults were mercy.
Your pain was...
A projectile struck the balcony's support column.
Not a stone.
Not her flare. One of Toller's charges, hurled with mechanics' precision. The column erupted. Bone and mortar blasted outward.
The balcony lurched, and for a breathtaking instant Lysandra's composure cracked, her hands flailing as the world betrayed her gravity.
The balcony gave way. Lysandra fell with her attendants in a tangle of robes and limbs, disappearing into a bloom of dust and splintered bone. The silence afterward was not reverent. It was stunned, animal, as if the city itself had not believed she could die.
Then the street surged toward the cathedral gates like blood returning to a heart.
Hadra moved too fast, decisive, as if duty could be salvaged from the wreckage.
She shoved through her wavering guards and strode into the broken threshold, not to protect Lysandra, I realized, but to reach her first.
To control the meaning of her fall. I followed, because I am a coward in love with explanations.
Inside, the cathedral-state was worse than the street's a vast chamber of ribs and altars, its ceiling lost in shadow.
The air thrummed with the low vibration of the city's ancient engines, those eldritch hearts buried below. Always hungry.
Pillars carved like femurs rose toward darkness, and the floor was inlaid with genealogical mosaics that reduced human lives to decorative patterns. Near the shattered base of the balcony, Lysandra lay amid rubble. Her pale robe had torn, and dust clung to her skin like ash. She was alive, of course she was.
Monsters do not die conveniently. Hadra stood over her, breathing hard. Around them, insurgents poured in, smugglers, fathers, mutinous soldiers, clerics without banners. Marek pushed through, his face streaked with soot, eyes wide as if he couldn't believe his own prophecy had become architecture. Lysandra looked up at Hadra. Her voice, when it came, was thin but still sharp with authority.
"Hadra," she whispered,
"restore order." Hadra's jaw tightened. "Order," she repeated, as if tasting it.
Then she looked around at the chamber filling with enemies, at the burning tapestries, at the broken altar where sacrifices used to be recorded with clean ink. And she did something I had never seen her do.
She hesitated. Saren entered behind us, rifle raised. "End it," Saren said to Hadra, not pleading, commanding.
"Oh, we'll end you with her."
Hadra's eyes flicked to Saren, then to Lysandra. "You want a spectacle," Hadra said softly.
"That's what this has become." Marek stepped forward.
"Not a spectacle," he said.
"A reckoning." Lysandra smiled, blood in the corner of her mouth. "Reckoning," she echoed, savoring the word.
"My child, you have no idea what you're inviting in. Without me, you will build the same walls and call them freedom."
Marek's hands trembled on his weapon.
"No," he said, but it sounded like a prayer against drowning. Hadra's gauntlet rose slowly. For a moment I thought she would help Lysandra stand, restore order, restore the familiar cruelty. Instead, Hadra seized Lysandra by the collar and hauled her upright with brutal ease. "You taught us," Hadra said, voice carrying through the chamber, "that a body is a resource." Lysandra's eyes narrowed.
"Yes."
Hadra turned, forcing Lysandra to face the crowd. Then you can be used like one. Saren fired. The shot struck Lysandra in the chest.
Not a clean kill. The matriarchal sighed, coughed, tried to speak another liturgy, and the second shot took her throat. Lysandra fell, and this time there was no balcony to blame, no accident to preserve her myth. Her cult center was simply meat on sacred stone. The chamber erupted not in mourning, but in release.
People screamed, people laughed, people sobbed.
A cleric tore the womb sigil from her own robe and stamped on it until it disappeared into blood. Hadra stood still, staring down at the body as if waiting for it to get back up and issue another decree.
Marek exhaled like someone surfacing from deep water. He turned to me, eyes wet. "It's over," he said.
I wanted to believe him.
I wanted it so badly my bones ached with it. But already, across the chamber, I saw shapes forming in the vacuum. A circle of fathers' faces, hard, hungry, had begun to gather near the record altars, arguing in urgent whispers. One of the imprisoned scholars, freed and half delirious, was unrolling salvaged ledgers and talking about continuity, about necessary inventories. Broodmistress Karis, somehow alive, stood with a hand pressed to a bleeding cut on her forehead, staring at the vault doors not with horror but with calculation. "Someone has to manage the stores," Karis was saying to anyone who would listen.
"The mails.
The gene vaults.
If we don't, the city collapses."
"Manage," Mac repeated beside me, voice souring. On the far side, Saren was already barking orders to the mutinous soldiers, assigning posts, re-establishing patrol lines.
The same clipped cadence.
The same hunger for control. Only now wearing a different justification. Hadra heard it too.
Her gaze drifted from Lysandra's corpse to the reorganizing rebels.
I watched her recognize the pattern, the way power rushes to fill any hollow, the way fear invents necessity. She leaned down, picked up Lysandra's fallen staff, an obscene thing carved from fused vertebrae, and held it loosely, not as a symbol but as a test weight.
Then she met Marek's eyes across the chamber.
"You wanted her gone," Hadra said. Marek lifted his chin.
"Yes."
Hadra nodded once, almost respectful. "Now you'll learn what she learned."
The city doesn't run on ideals. It runs on bodies. Marek's mouth opened, but no argument came out whole. Outside, the cathedral-state burned. Inside, the first arguments of the next order were already being spoken with the same fervor as the old prayers.
I looked at Lysandra's body, small now, stripped of height and echo, and felt no triumph, only a cold, sick comprehension.
We had toppled the cult, but the cathedral still stood,
and everyone left alive was already deciding what to do with the altar. Chapter 7: A New Order Emerges. Chapter 7: A New Order Emerges. The first thing they did, after the ash settled and the banners were restitched with different pronouns, was rename the chambers. The womb registrar became the seed registry. The matron's hall became the father's tribunal. The hymns remained, only the mouths that sang them changed shape, and the hands that held the knives were suddenly hairier.
I stood in the nave of bone and lacquered cartilage, and watched the old architecture accept the new lie without complaint.
The mother city had always been a cathedral, the function ribs as buttresses, vertebrae as columns, femurs arched into doorways too tall for anything human to have built. Now those same bones held new proclamations. They had scraped Lysandra's sigils from the altar, and set a lectin in their place, carved from a pelvis polished to a wet shine.
Marek stepped up to it wearing a coat that tried very hard to be a uniform.
He had insisted, the night before, on no crown, no scepter, no ritual braid of teeth. We are not them. He'd said, jaw tight, eyes bright with exhausted conviction. But the council fathers had dressed him anyway, draping him in symbols like weights.
Someone vino, if I had to guess. The archivist had a gift for making tyranny look like tradition, had fastened an iron clasp at Marek's throat engraved with a new title.
*** protect a patriarch. ***.
My laughter stayed inside my ribs where it belonged.
I had learned, in these cities, that humor was safest when swallowed. The nave was packed mutinous soldiers turned wardens, smugglers turned officials, a handful of scholars blinking as if dragged into daylight too fast.
Behind them, penned between bone rails, stood the women they'd captured and the last sweet clerics in torn veils, functionaries with their hands bound in cord.
Caris was there too, the old brood-mistress stripped of her red apron, her face unreadable as weathered stone. Someone had put a gag on Lysandra. Not because she could command any more her eyes were empty of that ancient, terrible certainty, but because even now the thought of her speaking made men flinch as if from a blade. Marek's voice carried in the vaulting like a prayer forced through clenched teeth.
We end the harvest.
A murmur, a ripple, hope like a fever. We end the cataloguing of human bodies as livestock.
He glanced down at the words Vino had drafted for him, no doubt then back up. We end the separation by birth. We build a common law.
Food distribution.
Labor rights.
Carts. No more asterisk mothers asterisk. Someone shouted from the back, and laughter followed it, brittle and hungry.
Marek's mouth tightened. No more asterisk, masters asterisk, he corrected, and his gaze swept the hall, searching for the faces that had once met him in tunnels, that had whispered with him over stolen lights. Some met his eyes, and looked away, as if seeing him clearly for the first time, and not a spark, not a clandestine miracle worker, just a man at a lectern, trapped by the very crowd that had lifted him.
When the oaths began, I felt the old machinery beneath the floor respond.
Not metaphorically.
Literally. A low vibration crept up through the bone tiles and into my boots, into my teeth. The deep engines, those eldritch mechanisms the clerics had always insisted were holy, alien lungs that kept the cities warm under starless skies hummed in their patient, blind way.
They did not care who spoke above them. They had never cared. After the ceremony, Marek found me in a side passage where the walls sweated salt. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. Power does that faster than hunger.
Ilya, he said, as if my name still meant asterisk friend asterisk and not asterisk asset dot asterisk. Tell me you saw it.
Tell me they heard me. I saw your mouth move, I said.
That's the part I can verify.
He huffed a laugh that died quickly.
Vino says we need time. Harkin says we need fear.
Both are correct, I said.
That's the worst part.
He leaned his shoulder against the bone, eyes closing for a beat.
I thought once the matrons were gone, it would be asterisk open air dot asterisk. I thought people would breathe and remember they were human. They are breathing, I said.
They are just inhaling the same old smoke. His eyes opened sharp. I need you in the registry.
I need someone there who remembers what it was, not what they wanted to become.
I almost told him I remembered too much. Instead I asked, what are you going to do about the pens? The prisoners. His jaw worked. They're not. He stopped, and that pause was the first crack in him I couldn't joke away.
They are people.
That sentence is going to cost you, I said softly. I know.
A shadow moved at the junction ahead. Sentry Harkin stepped into view, his new uniform still smelling of someone else's blood.
He had been a border guard once, a man who followed orders because orders were simpler than thought. Now he wore authority like a second skin that fit too well.
Protector, Harkin said, not quite saluting, not quite bowing. The tribunal is assembled. Marek pushed off the wall.
Then let's hear what my saviors want from me today.
Harkin's eyes flicked to me. And the cataloger? Ilya comes, Marek said.
Harkin's mouth twitched. Of course.
The Father's tribunal convened in what had once been Lysandra's oracle chamber. The same circular room, the same ceiling of fused skull plates, their sutures filled with gold.
They'd flipped the central dais, literally turned it around so the speaker now faced a different set of carved faces.
As if orientation could raise history. Vino sat at Marek's right hand, ink-stained, serene.
Across from him, Tola the mechanic looked out of place among the new robes and polished boots, grease under her nails. eyes that kept drifting upward as if listening to the ceiling breathe. Harkin stood behind Marek like a threat made flesh.
The councillors spoke in turns, each one offering a brick for the wall they were building. "We must secure the breeding vaults," said one of the smugglers, voice thick with newfound righteousness.
"If we don't control reproduction, we will be overrun." "Overrun by whom?" Marek asked.
"By them," a gesture toward the pens, toward the idea of women as a single hostile organism.
"You've seen what they did to us."
Marek's face tightened.
"I've seen what power did to us."
Another councillor, one of the scholars, thin as a reed, cleared his throat. "The economy depends on the genetic stores. We cannot simply—"
"Listen to yourself," Marek snapped. "Stores.
Like grain." The scholar flinched, and Vino spoke gently, like a priest soothing a penitent. "Words are habits, protector.
Habits take time."
And in the meantime," Marek's hands spread on the table, palms up, "we keep people in pens until their names become habits again." Harkin leaned close, voice low enough to be almost private.
"You can't make them swallow mercy, sir. They'll choke."
Marek turned toward him. "Or perhaps they'll remember how to eat."
Harkin's gaze stayed flat.
"Mercy is a luxury of the victorious."
"We are not victorious yet." Toller shifted, finally speaking.
"The engines are straining." Everyone ignored her, as everyone always did when the machinery's needs contradicted politics. She persisted, eyes on Marek. "You can hear it, can't you? They've been fed a certain way for generations. Blood rituals, bio-waste, heat exchange. If you stop the old processes overnight, the deep systems will."
"Will what?" One councillor scoffed. "Sulking metal."
Toller's stare hardened. "They aren't metal." A silence, sudden and uncomfortable. In it, the hum beneath the floor thickened, like something turning in its sleep. Marek rubbed his forehead. "We will transition."
"We will not replace one harvest with another."
Vino slid a parchment forward.
"Then sign this, at least."
"Emergency reproductive edict. Temporary. A safeguard." Marek scanned it. I watched his eyes move, watched his face turn by increments from fatigue to horror.
"They want mandatory pairing licenses," he said.
"Curfews for women.
Relocation to domestic districts. This is
stability," Vino said softly.
"This is preventing reprisals. This is preventing chaos."
"This is Lysandra with a beard," Marek said, voice raw. Harkin's hand settled on the back of Marek's chair, not quite a grip.
"Sign it."
Marek looked at me then, as if I could translate the room into something survivable.
I gave him what truth I had left.
"They didn't follow you because you promised freedom," I said. "They followed you because you promised them ***. Marek's throat worked.
He set the parchment down as if it burned.
"No," he said.
"Not this."
The room exhaled in one collective, resentful breath.
"You refuse the tribunal?"
the councillor demanded. "I refuse the cycle," Marek said, standing.
The clasp at his throat caught the lamplight, that new title shining like a shackle.
"If you want a master, find a man hungrier than me." Harkin moved faster than I expected. His arm came around Marek's shoulders, not a chokehold. Not yet, but the beginning of one, a restraint dressed up as escort. "Protector is unwell," Harkin announced to the room.
"He needs rest."
Marek twisted, eyes blazing.
"Don't you dare."
Vino didn't look surprised.
That was the most damning thing about him, the calm of a man who had already archived your downfall. I stepped forward without thinking.
That, too, was damning proof that some part of me still believed in sparks. "Harkin," I said. My voice sounded small in that skull-ringed chamber.
"If you bind him, you make him a martyr."
Harkin's eyes slid to me, pale and cold. "Then we'll teach the city to hate martyrs." Marek stopped struggling.
Not because he'd surrendered, because he'd calculated. He looked at me once, a quick glance full of apology and stubborn love for a future that would not arrive.
"Listen," he said to me, and perhaps to the bones themselves. Write it down, Ilya. Write down what we became, so someone else can be ashamed later.
Then Harkin dragged him out.
No one stopped it. Not the smugglers who had once risked their lives for secret meetings. Not the scholars who spoke of ethics when it cost nothing.
Not Karis in her pen, watching with the distant patience of someone who had always understood that regimes change clothes. Not hearts.
Not me. I followed, because I am excellent at following. It is my greatest skill and my oldest sin.
They took Marek not to a cell but to the undercity, where the old maternal reliquaries had been, and where the deep engine's access shafts yawned like throats.
Pola was there already, her face grim. You can't put him near it, she hissed at Harkin. It reacts to...
To what?
Harkin snapped. To intention, Toller said. Her voice dropped. To sacrifice. To asterisk ritual dot asterisk. You think you ended religion because you swapped who wears the robes. The machine doesn't care what you call yourself.
It cares what you feed it.
Harkin shoved Marek toward the threshold anyway.
We feed it trouble.
Marek's boots scraped on the bone steps.
He lifted his chin, breathing the cold air that smelled of minerals and old blood. The hum rose, eager as a held note.
I stood at the edge and peered down into the shaft. Far below, something vast moved, not with gears, but with slow, organic inevitability, like an animal turning in its sleep, like an alien god dreaming of heat.
Marek looked back at me.
You were right, he said quietly.
They wanted to turn. I swallowed.
And you?
I wanted an end.
Harkin made a sharp motion. 2 guards seized Marek's arms.
I found my voice, hoarse, meked. He smiled, small and weary-humored in a way that made my chest hurt, as if he'd borrowed my own defense at last. Don't romanticize this, Ilya.
If I die, it's not noble.
It's just insistent.
Then, before Harkin could stage it into a lesson, Marek wrenched free with a suddenness born of desperation, and dove forward into the shaft. Not falling asterisk offering dot asterisk. For a moment he was a dark shape against the pale walls, coat flaring like a broken banner. Then the hum deepened into something like satisfaction, and a pulse of heat rose up that made the bone steps sweat,